This podcast discusses themes of mental health, which some people may find emotive, such as suicide or other adult-themed content. The information contained in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. All views expressed are solely those of individuals involved and do not represent the opinions of any entity whatsoever with which we have been, are now, or will be affiliated. The information is not meant to diagnose or treat any mental health condition. If you're experiencing mental health symptoms, we encourage you to contact a mental health service within your community. If you're experiencing a mental health emergency, please seek the relevant support and interventions by presenting to your local accident and emergency department or contacting the relevant emergency services.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Welcome to The Man Hug, the monthly men's mental health podcast. I'm Dean McShane.
I'm Dan Cooper.
I'm Ian Pearce-Hayes.
And I'm Conleth Kelly.
Each month we will discuss a different topic related to men's mental health, which will include a guest speaker who will discuss their own personal story. And each month we will also be showcasing an organisation or charity within the Merseyside area who work within mental health to help build your signposting skills. Everyone okay, yeah? Okay. Hello and welcome to the latest episode of The Man Hug. This month we are focusing on the theme of masculinity, and once again we're joined by two fantastic guests. The good news is our beautiful co-host and stato Conleth is back in the hot seat this month. As we know, many of our listeners missed his sweet tones last month.
Well, what do I say to that? I was here, just that you hid it away from me. You just don't want me part of it.
Well, he's back, everyone. So later on, we're going to be joined by Tom Van Den Hurk, who is one of the co-directors of a new short film documentary, which is called A Little While Longer. It follows 3 male suicide attempt survivors, and they come together on the beautiful Isle of Aran for 3 days to share their stories of struggle, survival, and resilience. It's supported by the See Me Scotland Anti-Stigma Fund, and it was created by filmmakers Tom Van Den Hurk, a suicide attempt survivor himself, and Dr. Isa Rao, a cognitive neuroscientist. A Little While Longer is a wake-up call to break the silence and end the stigma surrounding suicide, and we've been lucky enough to see the film, and it really is beautiful and powerful. First, we're really thrilled to be joined by Jeff Charles, who we met last year when we attended the Men and Boys Coalition Conference in Manchester. Jeff was one of the keynote speakers that day, and he blew us all away with his inspirational story. And we all made a beeline during the break to him to get him onto the podcast. So Jeff, thank you so much for joining us here on The Man Hug.
Thank you for having me.
I think you've won an award for the furthest travelled guest that we've had as well, and we massively appreciate that. So tell us where you've come from.
Well, I've come from Essex. It weren't too bad. Yeah. They say, while you're marching, you're not fighting anyway.
Fantastic. You've come all the way from Essex, which is just brilliant. So your story really moved us so much. So for our listeners, would you mind just telling us a little bit about yourself and a little bit of your story?
Yeah, of course. So I guess, so perhaps I'll work backwards. So I'm a father of 4. I've got 3 sons and a daughter, and I work in the gas industry for a company called Cadent. We maintain the largest pipeline network in the UK. I suppose my journey really has been, it's full of ups and downs, as sort of many of ours are, and I guess from sort of a young age. Growing up, there's always that sort of overshadowing feeling of, I wanted more and sort of not knowing where to go. And I guess when it all really started, probably when I was about 6, 7. I've got a twin brother and a little sister. My mum sort of brought us up on her own, and she was amazing, brilliant, really amazing woman, beautiful, and she taught us a lot about life and resilience, and sort of it's always sort of trying to stay positive, and regardless of what's happening, things always get better. And she was a real living testament to that. Up until the day she died, she lived for other people, and so really lovely childhood, really growing up, but things were a struggle. Things were tough, and you know, when you're younger, you're a bit oblivious to things. You don't really notice things, and then slowly as you get older, you start to realise, you know, how comes I haven't got this stuff? Or, you know, why haven't I got that food in the cupboard? Why haven't I got the newest this console, these clothes? And so yeah, I suppose, you know, growing up, you know, from a young age, again, I was oblivious to all of this stuff that's going on, and I suppose as I've got older, you know, in primary school, sort of year 6, year 5, you know, I had a good friend of mine. I used to go around his, and he was just, I remember just being blown away every time I was around his house, sort of, by like even the simple things like the food in the cupboard, like the sweets, the chocolates, you know. And his mum was a real feeder, so she used to sort of, movie night was amazing, and I used to look forward to it the most. And yeah, and then sort of come out of primary school and got into year 7, and I guess that's really where my eyes were sort of really like, whoa, wow, this is crazy. And it was, you know, like I say, money was tight, and I guess year 7, going to high school, being exposed to all that, you know, that's when I think you start to really see your position, I suppose, in that sort of scale of, you know, all these new people, they've got all this new stuff, and you sort of, it was like, oh God, I want this, you know, I need this, I want this, and it sort of, and that's what really sort of drove me really to, yeah, just look at how I could sort of start earning some extra money and bits and pieces, and sort of trying to, I know, get what they had, I guess, and alongside that becomes sort of an obsession with food. I think when I went into year 7, at that time it was very much still, there was vending machines around every corner, all the tuck shops sold sweets, you know, everything. It was just sort of everywhere. So again, that I've become really obsessed with food, and you know, I remember always, like in my blazer, I'd always have like a big packet of sweets in each pocket, and I was always sort of eating on them and munching away, and I sort of would, you know, I used to get a dinner ticket, and I think it was worth about £3.10, and used to be able to use it in the canteen or at the tuck shops. Couldn't use it at the vending machine, so I sort of then thought, well, this dinner ticket's no good. So what I'd do is, you know, if I didn't want to use it in the canteen, I'd sell it for like £1.50 or £2, you know, just to get the cash and use it in the vending machine. And then, yeah, as time's gone on, I suppose you sort of get more and more exposed to things, and you sort of start becoming more aware of what's going on, and thinking, oh, how can I get involved, and how can I do this, how can I do that? And yeah, I think by sort of year 8, really, it was like the final straw for the school. Like, you know, my mum was constantly called up there. I was getting in trouble with the police, and a lot of the time it was for like stupid stuff, really, like, you know, fighting, like criminal damage, just, you know, stuff that my mum really didn't need, but she still sort of stood by me and sort of never turned her back or never said that she was disappointed. But the school sort of had enough, really, and at that time they sort of called my mum up to the school and they gave her 2 options. They said, you know, there's 2 options. He gets relocated to sort of another school where they sort of deal with kids that have got learning, you know, they're a bit more challenging than a normal, or we can sort of, they called it work-related learning, so it just meant that for one day of the week you go to school, and I think it was about 2 or 3 hours on a morning, on a Friday I think it was, and then the other 4 days you get like a works placement, and you're not allowed to get paid. It has to be like on a voluntary basis. So that's what, you know, I thought, yeah, I'll do that, I'll jump at that. You know, my mum's a bit dubious, but I thought, no, I want to get out there, and, you know, I thought I'll try and find a job and see if I can get paid for it, of course. So that's what I did, and I started doing that, and I was getting £25 a day, and at that age, you know, you're like, wow, wow, look at all this money. I was loving it, and again, you know, a lot of that money was spent on food, and then I started sort of, you know, as you all do at that age, you know, I'm then on building sites with, you know, adult men. I'm 13, 14, and I'm with like 30-year-old, 40-year-old men, and you can imagine then what you're exposed to then. It's like another layer of things that you're seeing and experiencing, and you think, oh, I want to try this. Yeah. You know, and as a young boy, I didn't have that father figure to sort of, you know, idolise and look up to and guide me, really. And my mum done an amazing job at playing both roles, you know, and that's a very tough thing to do as a single mum. And she done it amazingly, but, you know, I still craved that older male, positive male role model. And, you know, the men that I then looked up to, you know, in my eyes they were amazing, but, you know, when I reflect back on it, they wasn't. You know, they weren't. They took advantage of me. They encouraged things that I shouldn't do. And then ultimately, like, from that time, you know, earning that money, you sort of, you know, as a lot of us do, you know, you end up wanting more, don't you? You want more. You've had a taste for a little bit, and you want more. So you look at, again, other options, and then that, from that point onwards, really, it was sort of, you know, looking at how I can earn extra money just to sort of sustain a lifestyle and you know, make things better for me and as well better for my mum, because, you know, we struggled and with things, and like even like if the washing machine broke down and like the fridge, or, you know, if we needed to do a bit of decorating, do some repairs or whatever, you know, it was nice to be able to sort of like help out and help get food, and like my little sister as well, you know, be able to treat her, and like my brother, and yeah, it was sort of, and then from that point, you know, things took a bit of a turn, I mean, left, and then sort of I got involved quite heavily in sort of, you know, I look back at it now, the criminal underworld, and it was quite, again, another layer that you're exposed to, another sort of level downwards into a world that ultimately, like looking back, is, you know, some of the things I used to get up to, I think, you know, I just, at a young age as well, and I had no fear. But this whole time, while everything was going on, you know, that obsession, the biggest obsession for me was food, and at that time I was probably, so yeah, going through school, I got up to about 22 stone, 23 stone, and like I say, yeah, by year 10, they let us do our GCSEs, and I sat my maths, English, science, and I think I got like 2 E's and a D, and then sort of after that, it was like the Friday went down to 2 hours in the morning, and there was no structure, there was no real sort of, you know, they weren't persistent with us being there. So at that time, I just sort of was dipping in and out of work placement, but I was focusing more on sort of, you know, criminality and trying to sort of grow that business, and that's how I did see it at the time, and I saw it as a business, and I was good at it. That's the thing, I was good at it, and I was sort of, people depended on me, and I built some good relationships, which I thought were good relationships with men that sort of inspired me really at that time, and I suppose that went on then till I was about 21. You know, so it was quite a long time. You know, sort of started off quite, you know, minuscule in the grand scheme of things, and then sort of ended up, you know, quite, you know, heavily involved and sort of, you know, me being eventually one of them blokes I looked up to, and that's how I sort of saw it. And it's funny because that whole time, you know, everything that I was doing, you know, deep down I knew it was wrong, but, you know, in that world you sort of justify it. You justify it yourself. It's almost like I had a visual scale in my head, like an equilibrium, and as long as I maintained that equilibrium, you know, things are okay. You know, whether that be like donating money to charity, helping people out, you know, buying people Christmas cards at Christmas. It's just all these little things, you know, in my head I thought, you know, okay, for every bad thing I do, I need to do a good thing, and that's sort of how I maintain it, and in a way I suppose it's how I slept at night. And, you know, it doesn't make it right. It was, you know, there's a lot of things that I did and a lot of choices I made that I regret immensely. And there's a lot of pain as well, especially to my mum, that I caused, like, you know, she worried all the time, you know, all the time, and eventually we reached a pinnacle. Sort of, my partner at the time was 8 months pregnant with my second son, and even at that point, you know, even having children, I was still sort of, you know, I was still doing what I was doing, and you know, I was scared, obviously, to sort of lose my liberty, but also, you know, at some points you get scared for your life, you know, because it is a bit of a battleground, and you sort of, there's that saying, that expression, you live by the sword, die by the sword, sort of thing, and there was a lot of violence around me, and, you know, it was, and that pinnacle sort of time when it all sort of come to a halt, and I think that you know, what happened for a reason. It was a blessing in disguise, really. So yeah, from this moment that happened, that was it. I just decided that's enough, and just sort of, you know, decided to walk away from that life. And I'm very fortunate that I was able to walk away, because not everyone can. And sort of, I've got, you know, associates, friends that have sort of, you know, they've lost their life either directly because of it or indirectly because of it, you know, as a result of it and being around it and in that environment and in that lifestyle. And I guess, you know, that sort of, you know, life for me, it was a way of life, and it was like I was, you know, it was hard to walk away from, you know, it was like I was grieving a person that I once was, because you do sort of, you become this this person, and you sort of then have to live up to that. You know, you become this character almost, so, you know, in a movie, and you sort of living this life, and you're sort of making decisions, and a lot of the time the decisions that you're making, well, for me, were decisions that went against my morals anyway. You know, so then you're creating that mental tension in your head. You know, and your self-esteem and how you feel about yourself isn't great, even though on the outside it might look amazing. And I'd say sort of after that it was, you know, enough's enough, and so I went back to sort of studying and ended up sort of being able to get my gas safe qualifications, which then enabled me to get into the job I'm into now. And I mean, time went on, I had 2 sons, was in my job, you know, but I wasn't happy. By this time I was probably a good 32, 33 stone. Yeah, I was humongous, and I was just, again, you know, I did used to drink, and I used to take drugs, and, you know, cocaine was an issue for me, sort of from an early age, and, you know, being around it and in that environment all the time, it was like, you know, I was heavily using, you know, if not every day, most definitely every other day. And it was even just to watch a film, and it was just silly. It becomes sort of just, you know, just, I'll watch a film, give me an excuse to sort of have a dabble, I guess, and being that sort of weight, and eating unhealthy, no exercise, and working long shifts, and again, sort of, you know, taking drugs, it's like, it's a recipe for disaster, not just your physical health, but your mental health. And I suppose at that time I wasn't really aware of them effects, that mental health side of things. And I think everything that you go through, you do carry with you, you know, in some capacity, like that trauma, and even the smallest things that happen to you at the time may not affect you, but they can leave a mark, and it will sort of come back to bite you, I guess. And I think, yeah, it was probably at the time, so I'd have 2, and then my little girl was born, and then my relationship broke down after that. Ended up sort of leaving the family home, and I was living on my friend's sofa, and sort of by that point I'd already I'd lost everything that I built up once already, and then the second time, and I'd lost it again. You know, so I'd lost everything again. I had to walk away from everything that I had, and, you know, not just my home and but my kids. You know, being that full-time dad that I've always, you know, that I've relished and loved to be. And I knew how important that was, you know, for my children as well, because growing up without my dad in the house and not being an influence in my life, I just wanted to make sure I was as present as I could be. And then being able to make the choice to walk away from that, you know, that really done me in. That really, like, hurt me, and that was a hard thing to recover from. But again, you know, time went on, and sort of you rebuild, and you ground yourself, and you get through that. And I guess things, though, you know, on the outside, you know, I did a good job at the time, 4 beautiful children, things were, you know, looking positive, things were looking good, but I was stuck in a rut. I was, you know, so unhappy in myself, like so unhappy in the sense that, like, even when I went to a shop to buy, you know, some food or whatever it was, I couldn't even look at the person behind the till in the face. Like, I couldn't even look them in the eyes. I was so ashamed of what I looked like and how I felt. And you know, you sort of, I acted like I didn't care, but I did. And you know, and you feel, I felt as though, like, there was no way out for me, really. I felt like, you know, sooner or later I'll be dead because of what I'm doing. Or I'll get to the point where, you know, I'll have to be looked after, and I'll be like a pressure, I'll be like a, you know, a burden for the kids and for my family. So I think it just, I don't know, in a way you start thinking about ways out, and at the time the logical thing for me was like, and you know, I was rationally thinking and making it, and it made sense to me, was sort of just to take my own life and just end it. And, like, you know, I found myself, like, recording videos of myself for the kids, like, you know, for different occasions. And I actually see it, a guy had done it on Facebook who was sort of dying from cancer, and he's made these beautiful videos for his children. And I thought, you know, I want to do the same thing, just so that they have got something to have and remember me and speak to me, essentially, for when I'm not here. And made these series of videos, and sort of uploaded them onto sort of on the internet, and put them in and sent them in emails and everything. And yeah, I think that moment there was sort of, that was it. Like, I really did make my mind up, and I thought, right, okay, that's it now. And then I sort of started looking up, you know, like sleeping pills and how many sleeping pills I have to take, and you know, and I was and that was it. But you know, the choice I made at that point, ultimately it didn't work. You know, it didn't work, and I'm still here today, thankfully. And you know, that it was like, up to that point, so many different things had happened to me. You know, like things that could quite easily, you know, have gone the other way. But then for some reason, it didn't. You know, I was given another chance. I always felt like I was the cat with 9 lives. And I think, and that moment was that sort of like, that was like the wake-up call that I needed. And it's hard for me to say that, because I had to get to that point to realise what I had, you know, and that realisation, I was like, and even looking back at the videos now, which I've still got, is so hard, because I don't recognise that person. Like, even in my eyes, I'm speaking, I know it's me, but I don't recognise him. And like the most hardest thing as well, and I suppose it's hard for me even now, is that the decision that I made would have ended up leaving my children without their dad. You know, and that was something that I wanted. You know, I was looking for the whole time I was a kid. You know, I wanted my dad there. I wanted to be able to rely on him. I wanted him to take me to the park, teach me how to ride my bike. All this stuff that I wanted. You know, my kids would have been in the same position, and I sort of made that decision. And it's sort of, even now, I find it hard to process. I think to myself, like you know, I just can't comprehend it. But the thing is at that time, you sort of, you know, for anyone that has been through that, you know, them intrusive thoughts, you make sense of it. It makes perfect sense, you know, and it does, and it just logically, you think, right, okay, yeah, you know, it's going to be difficult for them, but in the end, they'll be better off without me, you know, and and that moment really was the turning point for many things. You know, the main thing was sort of my weight. You know, I'd struggled. I tried diets, I tried this, I tried that, and sort of up and down. And I think that was the real, like, you know, the pinnacle moment. After that was sort of trying to then focus on getting healthy. You know, like I thought, you know, I'm going to start, because I'd always just trying to take everything at once. You know, like do this. On Monday I'm going to do this. So first of all, just started on food, restricted food right down, and then just slowly but surely sort of worked through it, and sort of over the last, is it 4 years now? So I went from about 34.5 stone to about 17.5 now. So yeah, it was, and I think that weight loss, that journey of weight loss, it, you know, the physical side obviously has its benefits. You know, there's things that I would never dream of being able to do, and I'm doing them. And I said it to myself this morning. I was like, wow, like, I'm doing this now. I'm doing this, you know. And I remember when I was a kid, from a teenager, on my birthday, I'd always say, this time next year, Jeff, you're going to be 5-10 stone lighter. You're going to be healthy. You're going to look amazing. And I remember just saying every year. I'd always say at my birthday. Next time next year, every year. And then it was the other day. I was like, wow, because my birthday's on Sunday, this Sunday. And I remember that sort of coming into my head, and I'm like, I sat there and I was like, I've done it. You know, I'm doing it. And it was like that moment. It was like, even now saying it gives me goosebumps, and it's so hard to process all these emotions, because you're like, you know, it doesn't feel real sometimes. You know, it's the things that I always dreamt of, the things I wanted to do and achieve, and you know, the person I always was, but was sort of bottled up, I guess, and then to sort of then, you know, bring that into fruition and try and do some positive, try and do some good, and be able to turn your life around. And like I say, the physical transformation has been, you know, it's been hard, but it's been very rewarding. But it's also like sort of the mental transformation. You know, that resilience, being able to sort of build that resilience to trust myself, to like accept myself for who I am. You know, and as well, like even on, I suppose, on a spiritual level as well. You know, finding faith again. You know, whatever faith looks like for anybody. It's like, yeah, finding that faith, finding what that means for me. And that's been an amazing journey, and it's sort of it's just been a real, you know, you don't anticipate, you know, losing weight or getting into fitness or, you know, looking after yourself, however that looks. You don't really, you sort of focus on that one thing, but you don't realise the ripple effect it has like on other things, other areas of your life. And I think, you know, for me, it's been a real, it's been a real life lesson, and I mean, it will never end. The journey will never end. It's always going to be, you know, there's always something else that you can learn. There's always something else that's going to happen, and that's the other thing as well, is once you can start to sort of accept that life is going to keep throwing things at you, which it does, you know, it doesn't stop. You know, like my mum died in December 2022, so last December, on the 22nd, and like that there was like complete shock out of nowhere. You know, didn't expect it, didn't see it. She's only 53, and you know, like being my only like real parent, and it was a real bit of pill to swallow, and you know, it's almost like that was a real big test for me. You know, up to that point, I thought, okay, you know, my instant sort of survival instincts when that happened was like, that's it. I just want to go wild, sort of thing, and just blow off some steam and you know, cut off the world and just, but I didn't, and I think, you know, because of where I've got to, and that resilience, that fortitude that, you know, I have built up, it has enabled me to sort of deal with things better, and especially with my emotions, you know, like with my emotions, like accepting them and acknowledging them and sitting with them, which is like so important to me. And you know, rather, like, I always used to try and fight the emotions. I used to think that, you know, fighting the emotions, don't feel sad, don't feel depressed, you know, don't cry, and all of this sort of very, you know, conditions of worth essentially that are applied to us by society, you know, and then you sort of end up feeling like you have to live up to them, you know, as a man especially. And I think, well, you know, you do get stereotyped, you know, we get stereotyped as men, you know, and I've definitely noticed that myself, you know, and it's so that really, again, the whole journey, and it has been a journey, but would I change it? I wouldn't change it. You know, the things, the decisions, the choices, it's all happened for a reason, you know, and that reason has sort of ultimately led me to where I am today.
Amazing. It's such an inspirational story, and I think, you know, it's like a million questions I want to really dive into around it, because it's so many angles, but it's so inspirational, you know, and as you say, to not just change your life around from that sort of like criminal world, and you know, to that's a reward in itself, you know, and getting your life back on track. But the thing about the weight really sticks with me, because when we look at things like weight or alcohol use or drug use, they're just behaviours at the end of the day. Yeah, they're just something that we do. But before those behaviours comes thoughts and feelings. So for you to change and, you know, lose so much weight and to change your life around, what did you have to do to control certain thoughts that were obviously making you find comfort in food and distress? What sort of process is involved for that, Jeff?
So yeah, Joe, it's a brilliant point, because that's the thing, is like everything that we do, there's a root cause, there's a reason at the end of the day. And you know, at the time, my association to food, you know, I didn't realise why I love food so much. You know, why did I had to go back to the root cause, and that's when I started working backwards. And I actually joined a weekly Zoom sort of a community group meeting. It's like a weight loss, and this is all about discovering sort of, you know, looking at your, because it's essentially I had a binge eating disorder. You know, it was I was binge eating. You know, and obviously having ADHD. Now, there's a big correlation between neurodivergency and binge eating, you know, on all ends of the spectrum, you know, whether that you're eating too much or not eating enough. And I think it was looking at that and looking at food differently. And then as well, is before what I used to do was I used to restrict, you know, I used to say, no, I'm not allowed that, I'm not allowed that, I'm not allowed that. And ultimately what I did was I didn't restrict anything. I just then looked at, you know, how I can, limit what I eat, but then also at the same time not restrict and live, I've still got to live my life.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I want to watch a movie on a Friday night and have some sweets for the kids, I still want to be able to do that. And I think it was just looking at that root cause of my behaviours, why I did do it, you know, and then trying to then disassociate food as sort of like a, you know, a luxury, just keep eating it. It was more like a, you know, as a fuel, as a source of fuel, essentially. Yeah.
That's fascinating, and it's so incredible to hear what you've done to change that process, and now, you know, having lost so much weight, the impact that's had on your physical health, but your mental health as well. You know, it's incredible. And now you're able to see yourself in a new light as well, and the person that you are. It's just incredible, to be honest.
Yeah, I think that is like the hardest thing, and what really is quite a sobering, and I guess it's a sad thing, is that going from one end of the spectrum to sort of being morbidly obese and feeling like society judged me all the time, and I did feel like, you know, I wasn't as accepted, you know, and I felt very I felt ashamed of how I looked, and then going to sort of where I am now, that has been another sort of thing to sort of battle, and you know, I'm very content with where I'm at, and I've got a lot more confidence. I'm able to speak to people and do the things that I'm doing, but at the same time, it gave me that thought that, you know, at that time I viewed the world as I did, and I felt as though people treated me differently. You know, I felt like people would stare at me, judge me, you know, take the mick out of me. But now I feel as though I'm treated completely different by society. You know, and that's another thing, is like, you know, is that what it is, or is it because of how I felt about myself and how I viewed the world? I was seeing it as that, and now, you know, it's that sort of internal reflection. Am I projecting out what I feel inside? You know, and it's that, and that's been another thing, and then sort of seeing other people that, you know, that I know are struggling with that sort of, with their weight or self-esteem or self-confidence, and with how they look, because, you know, ultimately there's any person in the world that's 100% happy with how they look. There's always something you're going to find in yourself that you're not quite happy with, you know. So it's that sort of, for me, is that they're realising that there is people out there that sort of felt like how I once did, you know, and I think sometimes, again, it's that condition of worth, you know, the societal conditions of worth that we sort of end up taking on, how to look, how to be, how to behave, and we sort of take that on as our own value, and we have to then think we have to live up to that, you know. But then for me, is it how you view the world? Is that a projection of how you feel about yourself inside?
So if you could give your younger self some advice, what would you go back and say based on all of this?
I think, you know, it would be very simple, is you're going to be okay. No, you're going to be okay. Trust yourself. Yeah.
It's so powerful, isn't it?
Yeah. Trust yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that's incredible. One of the things that we got to learn when we seen you in a conference is about like the work that you've done with charities like Lads Needs Dads, which is, again, it's an amazing charity, isn't it?
Yeah, they are.
And for, you know, yourself, you just said in your story there about not having a positive male role model in your life, you know, and how important that was for you. So why do you think it's important for young people, boys in particular, to have sort of positive role models? What does it shape for you, do you think? I
think naturally, you know, young men are very impressionable, for starters, you know, and if, you know, the sad fact is the stats show that there is so many more single parent households now, and especially single mums, and there's young boys out there that haven't got dads that are active in their life, and, you know, I think, you know, the younger, the age, sort of year 7 age upwards, they're at such a high risk of going into lives of crime and being taken advantage of. And the trouble is, if you've not had that male positive role model to sort of, I guess, look up to and know what that looks like in a way, you know, there is no correct way ultimately, you know, but, you know, that person who sort of guides you and sort of helps you develop your wisdom, develop your self-awareness, develop your authenticity, and help you to shape your own opinions rather than taking on other people's opinions, and ultimately looking at somebody else thinking, oh yeah, I want to be like him. And sometimes that stuff, you know, could be positive, but, you know, sometimes it's not. And I think, you know, the organisations like Lad Needs Dads and the other brilliant organisations out there are sort of really taking it back to basics and going to the grassroots approach, you know, taking the lads camping. You know, taking them to, you know, MMA, fishing, all of this stuff, which is, you know, is very, you know, it can be seen as a bit stereotypical, but ultimately it's, you know, you're giving these guys, you're giving these structure, and that's the thing is it's that structure. You know, it's that person to speak to that hopefully that they can relate to, and that's the thing ultimately as young men and young boys, you want to feel seen and heard. And you want to be able to relate to them.
Has a knock-on effect as well, because then they'll take that into their adult life, and then with
100%.
their kids, they'll take them fishing.
Yeah.
What do we talk about? Most weeks we talk about the importance of time for yourself, going fishing, going for walks, going jogging, and these interactions that they're having.
Yeah.
It's all going to lead on to more positivity for their life as you move forward. Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah. It's a ripple effect.
It is.
Yeah.
One of the big things from like when the adverse childhood experiences, the ACEs, one of the big things, the outcomes from that was that you always just need that one role model in your life, and that can be from peer mentor, and doesn't just have to be a parent as well.
Yeah.
For greater health outcomes in adulthood, for physical and mental health as well. So I think things like that, the lads needs dads are just so important, because in Liverpool we've got a lot of peer mentoring groups, especially around knife crime and things like this, where again role models can come from all different walks of life. It doesn't just have to be a certain person. So that's just so instrumental and important. From the work you do with going in schools as well, it's so important as well, Jeff. So we know if we educate at a young age, we can change stigmas, misconceptions, and we're talking about masculinity today. So what would you like to see being done in schools regarding masculinity, or what are you seeing yourself when you're going in?
I think the word masculinity now, it's been around since the dawn of time, but I think there's been such a sort of spotlight on it, since, with social media and certain individuals that are out there that sort of have probably made it almost like a taboo, and almost a bit of a negative subject, and then you can see sort of why the schools are sort of a bit, they tend to tread on eggshells. They sort of ban certain things, and they really sort of, it's almost like they're not really sure how to deal with the subject at the minute. And I think the only way to deal with it is to speak about it, to break it down, and sort of encourage autonomy for the young lads. And the work that sort of I've had the privilege of to be involved with is obviously with the organisation Progressive Masculinity, and the word can be sort of a bit misleading. Progressive, is sort of that. Again, there's stigma attached to the word progressive. And it's the approach again is that grassroots approach. You're going into schools and you're working with a young group of lads between sort of as young as year 6, but then into secondary school from year 7 all up to year 13, and you sort of, the groups tend to be between 10 and 15 of them over 2 days, and you're basically creating a safe space for them to express themselves, to be able to talk about things that normally they wouldn't be able to talk about in front of their teacher, because fear of being sort of told off or judged essentially. And so all you're doing is you're facilitating them an environment and creating a spark, and you want to fan the flame. And the work is so rewarding, because you start off and there's some very sort of basic exercises that you do, but have quite a lot of deep meaning. One, for instance, is called man points. So you you have a selection of pictures of different gentlemen. You could have there's a lumberjack, for instance. If you think of masculinity, you sort of that thing of that big guy in a wood with an axe, swinging it and chopping down trees. Or you got a gentleman that's in a wheelchair. Who could have MS. Or there's another picture of a young guy who's got Down syndrome. And we say to the guys, look, we want you to be completely honest. There is no right or wrong answer, and you're not going to be judged. You're not going to be told off. We want you to score the pictures 1 to 10. 10 being really manly and what you idolise, and 1 being, and it's that sort of that little simple exercise we do that at the start, and by the end of the 2-day session you sort of then look back at things and you review things, and to see the change, they're not walking out there completely changed young men, but there's a spark,
Planted the seed.
Exactly that, and that is exactly what you want to do is create autonomy and authenticity for them, and to be able to form their own opinions is massive, because a lot of the time, even as adults, we will form opinions based on things that we experience, but then we can take on other opinions that we see other people have. We might, it might resonate with us, it might not, but sometimes it's to conform with societal or cultural expectations rather than listen to your inner self. We'll give it that. So for us and for what we're doing is just really to that independence, and to challenge each other as well. There's pieces on how you're treating women, and we watch a video that's quite, raw, and it shows a young lady being harassed late at night. She's waiting for a cab by a group of young lads. And we sort of, we challenge them and ask them, what do you think? And it's really a two-way conversation. And that work there, that's the sort of work that needs to be done. That it's the taboo. Having them real conversations. Knowing that these boys can actually express themselves without being told off. Because if they can't say what they're thinking, they're bottling it up. And for us to be able to know what they're truly thinking and feeling, we need to encourage that. And the only way you can change that is by facilitating that environment. And hopefully they can. They ultimately it's got to start with them. Yeah.
It's so good to hear that you're doing that, but it's a shame that, again, like sort of grassroots organisations are having to pick up this and do it themselves.
Yeah.
But we had the Paul Lavelle Foundation last month, who are a male domestic abuse charity, and they're the same. They're going into schools to talk about healthy relationships and same types of scenarios what you were talking about there. But it's a shame that other people are having to do this rather than it being in curriculums and a part of their education, and things. But hopefully we'll come to a point where that does happen anyway. So you currently run the Masculinity Unplugged podcast. So why do you think it's important for men to talk about masculinity? We just spoke about children, and they're obviously our future for it. But why is it important that men start to address it, do you think?
I think for me, I come up with the name Masculinity Unplugged, and sort of the tagline is sort of unplugging from stereotypes, plugging into reality. Because as I probably previously mentioned earlier on, is I've been stereotyped. I get stereotyped on a daily basis. I'm 6'4". I have probably a sunbed once a month. Go to the gym. I've got tattoos. You look at me and you sort of. I've had people that sort of say, "Oh, I didn't expect this from you." I didn't expect this, and I think it's that there really got me thinking and thinking. Why? Why is that? And it is that stereotype, masculinity. Being masculine or being a man, there is no one shoe fits all. It's individuality, regardless of what you look like, what you do. However that looks like for you, and that for me is what's important. Is having conversations with men and women. Because masculinity doesn't just affect men; it affects women as well. There's women that are CEOs of companies, and they have to sort of take on a very masculine role and embody that. And I think it comes in so many different shapes and sizes. And I think for me, it's breaking down the stigma of what a man's supposed to be. What is a man supposed to look like? And ultimately, what you are. If you was to ask me what masculinity means to me, could mean completely different to what it means to you. So and that's what it's about. It's about understanding and learning how different it is across society and across the spectrum. For a gentleman who might be in a wheelchair, that doesn't sometimes feel, manly because he's got all this stuff to live up to. All these action movies, all this stuff. That all these guys are ripped and pumped and everything. And again, you people that might be a little bit overweight. I think a classic example for me is you look at films. A lot of the time in films, you got characters that will be funny or joking, and they tend to be a little bit overweight. And the main character will be like this, Brad Pitt lookalike or whatever. So it's that sort of stereotyping and sort of breaking that down, because I think that's so important, and for encouraging that conversation, and hopefully for me it's about accepting who you are. Trusting yourself, accepting who you are, and authenticity, and being true to yourself, and not having to live up to that.
Brilliant. Have any of you guys got any questions that you'd like to ask Jess before I dive into it?
One really, it's well, also pick up a point you said, about curriculum match. The curriculum. Well, I'm sorry to say it doesn't really matter, because you can't quantify that, you can't measure that. It's just, that's the thing that really does get to me. It's just it should be there, but industry-wise, it's not a priority. But one thing he did say, Jeff, at the start, and then you brought it in later as well, was just around that word structure. And I thought that was actually quite interesting, because I know someone at the minute who's actually going through rehabilitation. They're within a unit at the minute, and whenever they actually says, can you tell in one word what your childhood was like, and he thought about it and goes, unstructured, because his mum died whenever he was very young, and the father, God love him, he had issues as well, and things like that, and so more or less didn't know what to do. And so whenever he came home from school, it was just like, here's money, off you go, and don't bother me, that kind of thing. And so he went on this route, and it's that kind of thing, that turning point, which was talked about last podcast, whatever. around sliding doors, but sliding doors, like how if you went down one route and not the other route, and it's just to me this idea of a structure, this role model thing that dads need lads, that kind of thing. But I just thinking, I keep going back to your mum, thinking about that and how good a role model she was.
She's amazing.
Where would you be if it wasn't for her? I think that story. And did you say it's your birthday on
Sunday? Yeah, this Sunday.
Sunday and Mother's Day as well.
And International Women's Day today as well.
Yeah.
Shine a light on the mums.
I know, yeah.
I'm not really asking a question. I'm just thinking it's just a case of all the things that you've been saying, and just we can all put that to people who we know, to ourselves and things like this, or whatever. And when we talk about masculinity, which we'll be talking about later as well, it's just like, I'm not going to say, there's 4 nurses here. We get introduced as male nurses, which really riles me, but it's that kind of thing as well, and it's stereotypical things as well. So I just thank you, and Manchester as well,
I've got to say, Jeff,
beautiful.
You've done it again, mate.
Yeah.
Honestly.
I appreciate it.
I mean, you blew me away in Manchester, and then just sat next to you. And I think, when you started, you were a little bit nervous, but once you get into your flow, mate, you are one of the best speakers I think we've ever had.
I think
you're just brilliant. You just put it in a way that anybody can engage with, and I hope the listeners really do latch on to the amazing subjects that you've talked about, because it's so brilliant.
Can I just ask a question then? Because I think I agree with a lot of what Conliffe has said there. What I was really interested in is that about the relationships, because what you said I think is absolutely right. Half of humanity are female, half of them are men, and I think that when you said about the progressive masculinity is really important, because it's how we interact, and that's often the focus, and particularly because of all what you talked about, and I guess the crisis of masculinity falls from that. What you do, and you mentioned about you show the film of a woman late at night getting a cab and talk about the responses. How do you do? I'm just interested in that, because I think that's really important. People should be able to say what they think, but then address and call out misogyny, call out poor practice, and how that can be improved. How do you deal with that? I'm interested in that.
There's sort of three takes on it, and to simplify it, if you I'm sure we've all witnessed something one time or another where we're uncomfortable with, and then you've got to make that decision, that call, whether you step in, you do nothing, or you walk away, and and that is sort of how you structure it. And it's about when you see that interaction. I mean, I had one the other day myself with a parking warden that I spoke to, and he gave me a ticket, and I wasn't, I was just saying, look, mate, and he said, look, the ticket's a ticket, that's it. And it's about 8:30 in the morning, and a young lady's walked past, and she said to him, get a real job. She had that, and she walked past, and he was like, he basically told her to F off, and then she turned around and said, what? And he laughed in her face, and he spat in her face, this parking warden, right? And then with that, she pushed him, and then he punched her in the chest. Now, I was literally in my car at this point, and then I had to make the decision. It's about when you see that instance there, and it doesn't just have to be involving a woman; it could be involving anything, And this is the sort of scenarios we use with young men, is that you're an active bystander, you're an upstander, or if you're in that group of guys who are partaking in that, you say no, you walk away. You go, no, you guys you're better than this. I'm not taking part in this. And you walk away. But the aim is to get to that point where you are an upstander. You if something's not right, you're confident enough to call it out, but in a safe way. Especially if you're in a group of friends, you should be able to say to your friends, guys, we're better than this. And that is. And for me, that then, I got out of the vehicle and I did intervene, and not in a violent way, but, I just separated them and stopped what was going on. But again, I could have quite easily just sat there and done nothing. Yeah. And it's that again, and it's not always going to be safe to do so, and you're not always going to feel brave. You're not always going to feel like you're in a position where you can get out of the car and put on your cape and try and save the day, because that's just not how it works. But it's it's just about, again, is building that confidence and knowing the difference between right and wrong. And if it is wrong and it feels wrong for you, then call it out, do something about it.
Yeah, exactly. It is all things that hopefully then that also has that ripple effect. Hopefully that chap will. It could be stressful, things get whatever, but it is looking at other people's things. Just say one other thing as well is, I know we've seen your picture as well of before, after that kind of thing, where I'm not going to say diet through your exercise and things like that, just that it was actually quite frightening. Whenever we mentioned it, Dean actually was able to send it through to us on his phone very quickly. Swear it's on his screensaver, so just been thinking of things.
It's fine.
He's got a poster in his office.
I am not ashamed, boys. I'm not ashamed. So the last big thing is to plug your Masculinity Unplugged podcast. So for our listeners, I've seen clips on Instagram and it's so insightful and people can learn so much. How can they get involved? How can they?
Yeah, so I'm obviously on Instagram, Masculinity Unplugged, and it launches on the 31st of March. My first episode's recorded. That's just myself. I thought it was like the introduction, my why, my reasons, a little bit about me. And I'm sort of I've recorded another episode. I've got another 3 being recorded in the next sort of few weeks, and I've got some great guests as well. I've got a guy flying in from Italy. His name's Alex, who sort of had an amazing story, amazing journey. And there's some really, I've got quite a well-known person as well. He's sort of in the public eye who's coming on to have a chat. So, it's it'll be on Spotify, Apple Music, and Google as well.
If you need 4 male nurses as well, we're more than happy come and pay the favour.
Definitely, yeah.
Well, thanks so much for coming and telling us your story. It's as Dan said, it's so inspirational, and we heard it before, but to hear it again, it's so moving and so incredible what you're doing. And as I say, carry on doing what you're doing with the podcast as well. It's fantastic.
No, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Guys. We appreciate
Massively
it.
appreciate it.
Thank
Cheers.
you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Jeff.
Thank you.
Thank you. Cheers.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
There was that part of the podcast when myself, Ian, Conliffe and Dan have a look at the theme and bring you some information on this. So masculinity, it's such an interesting subject when we look at male health. In the field of men's health, we often talk about how men are trapped in a traditional masculine identity, which can often be detrimental to both their physical and mental health, and often discourages them from addressing health problems or seeking help. So where do our notions of masculinity come from? Who sets the rules about how men should behave or feel about mental health issues, and how they should cope and manage on their own? So sadly, we know from studies that a lot of this is passed down from generation to generation. With your classic social learning theory, we imitate what is around us. We also know that popular culture plays a big role in this, in steering the attitudes of each generation in a particular direction, and that can be to reinforce existing values and beliefs or promote new ones. Within media, we've seen a change over the last decade. Men are able to acknowledge and discuss their mental health as they would their physical health. Magazines in particular have moved from the new laddism of the 90s, which promoted juvenile, unpolitically correct, sexist, loud, often drunken yobbish masculinity that had fallen out of favour in popular culture. Now, there is more of an emphasis of men's health and how to manage your own physical and mental health through normalising the conversation, sharing stories of success and failure, and being more proactive in promoting the things that work. Saying that, new types of men are being invented and offered up by the media all the time. Often these can remain in the collective consciousness for years, especially if they can be used to sell products. Others often become the next day's chip wrapper. The old industrial man with views of hypermasculinity is often mocked today, but we know within generational divide, their often sexist and dated views still exist and impact on men reaching out for support when needed. In a study by Rebecca Pearson in 2021, she looked at masculinity and emotionality in education, and it's an incredibly interesting read that I would highly recommend. It highlights that even now in school, boys still feel like they must be boys within the school setting, which makes them vulnerable. Boys are described as bottling up and not talking about their emotions, reflecting dominant discourses of masculinity that position boys and men as emotionally inarticulate. There's still a lack of help-seeking behaviour, and those students who have mental health difficulties often appear withdrawn, vulnerable and emotional. I go back to the point raised by Dr. Seiss in one of our earlier episodes. Men might now be starting to talk about their mood, and in particular things like sadness, but that is not the only emotion that we have. We still have a long way to get men to talk about anger and guilt and fear and love and trust and shame and all of the other feelings. So let's try and normalise these like we have done with sadness. Our friends over at Chasing the Stigma, who provide the hub of hope that we always talk about here on the Man Hug, have posted an amazing post today for International Women's Day on trailblazers for mental health. And there is a quote from the wonderful Nellie Bly, whose work prompted reforms in mental health, and it is, "Energy, rightly applied and directed, will accomplish anything." Over to Conliffe.
Okay, follow that one. Yeah, cheers for that. Well, I have got a couple of statistics, not really that much regarding masculinity, but obviously it's about the individual's opinion whenever actually looking around in it. And from a study by STEM4, it actually says that 46% of men who were actually asked around that, 46% wouldn't ask for help for a problem that actually made them upset, anxious or depressed, even if things got really bad. And 30% of them actually said they felt weak and ashamed, and 21% of the people that actually would laugh or people actually think would less of them. And 14% of them actually thought they'd be less masculine. And see, this thing, this was actually talked about, men, boys, looking at those things. But the idea of masculinity, it does go across several genders, genders in particular. Because I've got a really good quote here by the fantastic footballer for the Lionesses, the Demi Stokes, played for Man City, your favourite team, Dean? Aye?
She won't be on Sunday.
England star as well, 32, and she actually was talking about the tough love upbringing, about beating the boys and achieving her childhood dreams, which is brilliant, it's fantastic, you think of these things. But one of her coaches, she actually said she came from a family of strong women. And I always talk about the time I actually got kicked in a game when I was 14. It really hurt and I wanted to cry. Then I saw my mum coming over towards me to give me a hug, I thought. But she bent down and says, "Don't you dare cry," rubbing my bleeding knee, and walked off. That stuck with me. Even now if I get hurt, I think, quick, get up, because mum will be fuming. It came from a place of love and care, and we do think of those things. It does come from love and care, but it's these emotions, and it was this tough love upbringing they were actually thinking. So what Demi's actually saying, her mum did actually put her towards equipping her for life and actually doing a really, really good job. So think around those issues. But one of the things, obviously when we talk masculinity, we talk about the other side of it with toxic masculinity. I don't want to be stealing anybody's thunder, because I'm sure some other people will be talking around this. But this fella, who some people may know of, I'm not into social media a lot or things like that, whatever. But this fella, Andrew Tate, don't know if you've heard of him. But he's the one who got arrested in Romania, wasn't it? Or house arrest, all those kind of things. But one thing I actually did really like was, you probably are aware of this, he sent a tweet off to Greta Thunberg or whatever. God forgive me saying it like him. Greta, I've got 33 cars. My Bugatti is a W16 8-litre quad turbo. My 2 Ferrari 812s Competition, I don't know, with cars, 6-litre, all this kind of thing. And this is just the start. Please provide your email address so I can give my complete list of car collection and respective enormous emissions. So obviously whenever it comes to cars with some toxic masculinity, when we think of those things, it's all to do with it, what they're spewing out, it's all relative with sex, genitalia, things like that, and obviously it's this kind of thing, enormous emissions, and so it's this unsolicited dick pick energy she actually comes across. And so obviously Thunberg actually knew about this and seemed to be aware of it, and she says yes, and she actually did tweeted them and said, "Yes, do enlighten me, email me at smalldickenergy at getalife.com."
Hashtag knobhead.
I was going to say, are we allowed to use the T word on this podcast, because he sounds an absolute T word?
Oh yeah, and that's the thing though, it is, but so many people are actually following him. So many, I wouldn't say, is it young males, women? I don't know. But it is because they look at him. This is a man. Things that he was, cage wrestler or something like that, all these kind of things. And it's just this is what has to be a man, be ripped and things like this, whatever. And this toxic masculinity we're actually looking at, it's a stereotypically male behaviours that are harmful to men and society as a whole. So is toxic masculinity actually to blame for the recent rise in the number of boys worried about what they actually should look like, whatever, think of those things. Then we actually got the likes of programs on TV, media actually comes into this as well. Because it always used to be, whenever I was growing up, remember doing sociology things that would talk about media influence on young people, but it was always about young girls with this is what you got to look like, this is the shape you got to be in, things like this, whatever. And obviously that has now progressed, obviously within the male generation as well. But you get these programs like Love Island, I know Dan's, it's one of his favourite shows. I've never watched Love Island because I'm afraid of my TV getting chlamydia. But it's the most watched TV program among 16 to 24-year-olds. Has been criticising being openly promoting toxic masculinity. The men in the show are athletic, good-looking and competitive, and the women are actually slim, beautiful and referred to as difficult, as if the women show signs of annoyance or anger or things like that, they're difficult then. And then this actually then brings into that next dark element that we also are all aware of regarding online pornography, things like that, like, how sexual violence can be seen as normal, like, the size of the genitals, all these different things, whatever. And it actually, this is what I need to be, this is what I need to be like, do these things. And, whenever it comes to sexual violence, I was actually trying to get some statistics on this, but I couldn't find any recent one. But I did find one which I was aware about. In 2022, within the UK, 60 women were killed during sexual acts, violence and things like that, whenever they were actually in the throes of sex with their partner, and 0 men got killed during that same period with, the same thing. So we do have to think of those things, what is going on here with the aggression, the anger. And like I said, pornography is a big issue for me, real concerned about. I don't mind saying it. Whenever I was growing up, where did I get my kicks from? If you got my mum's Littlewoods catalogue, it would just automatically just open up, just fall open at the women's laundry section. And these are things, and it's just what is actually available out there.
Confessions of a Buttery Irish.
But, I don't want to talk too much about this because Ian's going to be talking about it, but it's about Grayson Perry. I don't know whether it's pop psychology or whatever. He's not really doing these things. He just wants to get stuff actually out there about masculinity and talking around those things. And it's actually quite interesting because I've had listened to him on podcasts as well, and we've talked about gender different things, that it's always blue for boys, pink for girls, but that's only just a recent thing. It's came at the start of the last century. Coming in, it was always the other way around, and so it just shows things can change, like what we actually think can be pretty set in our ways. Being masculine is not about being a sissy. Men are risk takers and starting wars. We start financial scandals. We want to take our anger out in the world. We have to think of those things. And this is a classic one, which I've actually said before. And I know Dan was there whenever we actually were presenting this at a conference. Sometimes men actually need to work less on their biceps and maybe more on their intuition. Maybe think of those things. So thanks for that. And I'll pass you over to our Ian.
Thanks, Conliffe. A lot of things for today. It is International Women's Day, and I think as the podcast, as Jeff and Conliffe and Dean have actually said, we are men. We try and tackle some of the issues around men's mental health. I think it needs to be said right from the start in terms of for today. It affects half of our listeners are women. We are all, Jeff's talked about the positive role model of his mum and the effects when she died that it had on him. Women are, half of the population, but they are important in terms of those role models. International Women's Day. It was established in 1911, and it was part of an attempt to try and campaign for equality for women in terms of with men. We're over 100 years we've had International Women's Day. Are we any near for that equality? And of course we're not. You look at the UK and in Britain, women didn't get the vote till 1928, so it's not even 100 years. We're still 4 years off that vote so that they could actually vote alongside
for men. So it's not quite 100 years. So even in despite of that, huge gains over those 90, 100 years for women and for us all, but we still need to recognise what we mean when we talk about women's oppression. And what I mean by that is about that systematic societal discrimination and bias towards women. I looked at, we were talking about this, and I've got The Guardian from this week. I'm a Guardian reader. It's a liberal newspaper. Just three issues on one paper. So on big article on page 2 on endometriosis, which is where you have the tissue affects women, obviously. It's where the tissue, which is similar to the womb lining, grows elsewhere within the ovaries, fallopian tubes. It causes pain, affects fertility for women of a childbearing age. It causes pain, affects painful periods, bowel movements, going to the toilet, sexual intercourse. It affects 1 in 10 women of childbearing age. The article is talking about how long it takes women to actually get a diagnosis for endometriosis, and it's around 9 years. That means repeated GP appointments, getting to speak to people. Why? Because they're not taken serious and not listened to, and it's actually prolonging their effective treatment for those conditions. And I know from my own, we're all nurses around this table, and I know from my own experience in terms of acute myocardial infarction, heart attacks, it affects more men than women, there's certainly, but there's real issues in terms of when women actually present with it because of that. They don't meet the symptom criteria, but often it's because they're not taken seriously in terms of when they actually present. And that's the historical baggage of hysterical women, of women making a fuss and not being taken seriously. So that's page 2 of The Guardian. Page 15 talks about 130 women. Conlif's just mentioned about the number of women killed actually in sexual intercourse. This is about fatal falls, and it actually documents 130 women were killed, whether they're fatal falls or whether they were pushed by their partner. And again, it's that they've been investigated, and again, in suspicious circumstances, women have just had a fatal fall and been reported by their partner, and it's a growing concern. On the same page 15, is the whole issue of the 3 years on about Sarah Everard, who was the young woman who couldn't walk home, was actually attacked, brutally beaten, killed and raped by a police officer. And again, over 100 women every year are brutally killed and murdered, but can't even, so that's health they're discriminated against. This is socially and in relationship, just walking socially, that they're unsafe and safeguarded, and then not safeguarded. Page 31 talks to CEOs, sort of sexism in the city is the article in the Guardian, and it's about women in work, and the CEOs are saying they're just not taken seriously, they're not just listened to. So the progress is that we've got women in senior positions. We've had 2 prime ministers, 2 female prime ministers, but the fact that there's 2 women, and you can name them, Margaret Thatcher and Liz Truss, just tells you.
Theresa.
Theresa May. 3. But the fact that you can name them tells you how many or how few they've actually been in terms of that side. The whole issue in terms of the sexism in the city, there are more in the FTSE 100 companies. There are more companies run by a person called John than there are women in terms of actually running those businesses and organisations. So again, it's that systematic discrimination, whether it's work, whether it's in health, whether it's socially and in terms of actually relationships. So again, that's why that has to be called out. And that's for us, the issue which Jeff and we've talked about is that issue about positive role models and about actually addressing positive masculinity as part of that. So I've looked at just a couple of books that have really tried to address that, and 2 books that have been interesting for me. One is by The Descent of Man by Grayson Perry, which Conliffe and I have certainly both read, and Conliffe's just alluded to that. And Grayson Perry says, I've got no insight. He says, I'm a transvestite artist. I've got no insight into how women think or aside, but I'm a man, and I've looked in terms of that masculinity and what that means. And I'm actually going to finish with his projection of man's rights, which I just think are very interesting and fit in, I guess, with some of the themes that we've actually talked about. But the most beautiful book that I've read is it's called Amateur, A True Story About What Makes a Man by Thomas Page McBee. And Thomas Page McBee was born female, and he's now a transgender person, and he talks about that transgender and his experience in terms of that journey for him. But he then actually went and fought in Madison Square Gardens in a boxing, and it's about his training and stuff for that. He's a journalist by background, so it's well written, but it is beautifully written, and I found it really moving. I've read it a few times because of his insight, I guess, into that world of masculinity, and he just talks very, very pointedly about it. Interestingly, both Grayson Perry and Thomas McBee talk about the psychology, which Jeff has spoke about in terms of the influence of psychologists with that idea of masculinity. So Thomas McBee talks about the man box, where psychologists look at three-dimensional box. An exercise for young boys, and actually ask what phrases go in terms of being a man box, what phrases don't go in. It echoes some of what of what Jeff was saying. It says, do not openly or express emotions, do not express weakness or fear. What goes in the box, demonstrate power and control. Do not be like a woman. Do not be like a gay man. And those things are often echoed in terms of what's been spoken today, but in terms of what that means in terms of masculinity. And that really what needs to be addressed when we're talking about men and men's mental health. If you want a good film that's out recently that's about talks about that patriarchy, about men's domination, then go and watch The Iron Claw, which is a beautifully shot and again very poignant film. But it talks the true-ish story of the Von Erichs wrestling dynasty within the wrestling in America, and it's absolutely the father is just an absolute rules with an iron fist. It's just breathtaking at times, but it's beautiful. Zac Efron, who plays one of the brothers in the film, it's an absolutely incredible role. But despite all of that, he comes through and is this very gentle, tender character, but the toxicity in terms of their relationships is just staggering. And I guess it's for us, it's about addressing those issues in terms of masculinity. I'll leave you with Grayson Perry's Men's Rights. This is what he's actually promoting in terms of what we should be able to, for boys, men, what we should be able to talk about. And this is what he states for men's rights: the right to be vulnerable, the right to be weak, the right to be wrong, the right to be intuitive, the right not to know, the right to be uncertain, the right to be flexible, and the right not to be ashamed of any of those. And for me, I think that's really what we need to address. And I'll just leave on one last thing, and it's probably my favourite quote. I've fallen out with Morrissey for his political.
I think everybody has one.
Exactly.
Yeah, because of his political, in terms of where he's actually gone for that. But I've always loved that line where he said, the strength to be gentle and kind. And I just think that's what being a man and being a human being, it should be really all about, is that right to be, it takes strength to be gentle and kind. And I think that's true. And I've just always loved that lyric. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. So I'm going to talk a little bit about masculinity and the connection with role modelling, and talk a little bit about my relationship with masculinity growing up. So I suppose the first role model that a lot of people have, male role model, would be their dad. From a masculinity point of view, my dad was, extremely handsome fella. He was very athletic, somebody to look up to. I think, the positive traits kind of ended there, really. I always say I love my dad dearly, but due to his own mental health, I feel he didn't deal with. He went on the progressive journey of alcoholism, and which led to him losing his marriage. And obviously, I think I mentioned this before, the fact that me and my brother didn't speak to him for some time. And a lot of the themes that have been discussed today, I've been able to kind of resonate with, really. I'll always love my dad. I suppose for many young men who perhaps don't have a father or that positive role model, the journey of recognising that one person that you should look up to and love more than anything, not being that person that you want them to be, can be very difficult. And I think over the years it's been a bit of a major issue that's affected my mental health, is that relationship with my father, who's now passed away. I really didn't have a role model to understand necessarily about masculinity and what I wanted to be and who I wanted to be as I grew up. I think a lot of thoughts about self-confidence with myself are around those two things that I mentioned about my dad, who was very handsome and very athletic, and I've always felt that I'm not that, and that, that's kind of affected my confidence and my ability moving forward. And he wasn't really a role model, he'd be in the pub a lot of the time, or we'd have to go along to the pub with him. He'd be arguing with my mum a lot of the time, and it affected me a lot. And I think we all have a responsibility as fathers, and I'm a father now, to be there for our kids. I've got a son and a daughter, and I'm in a position at the moment where I feel that I want to be the best possible role model I can be for my own son. He's at an age at the moment where that's quite difficult, because I think he just wants to find every opportunity to hate me. But that's, again, that he's not the only person in the world that feels like that, I'm sure. Thanks, Connors. But I want to make sure that as a role model, I do remain as positive as possible for him. And again, from what Jeff was talking about with the lads and his dads and everything he does with regards to that, it's giving kids that opportunity to have a positive role model where they may have not had a positive role model, and then they can take that through to their adulthood. I think because my dad wasn't a positive role model, I saw other role models, and I'm not saying all role models are positive. I think in this day and age of social media, that, as we've discussed before, with regards to this numpty Andrew Tate, and you got people on Twitter and on social media such as Joey Barton tweeting things who's an absolute gobshite. It's quite easy to latch on to thinking they're funny and their opinions are worth listening to. And again, we live in a very dangerous society with regards to that. I suppose I'm waffling on a little bit about my sort of story with masculinity and the lack of role modelling, but the fact that regardless of all that, I still love my dad dearly, even though he didn't offer that. Moving on to role modelling, I was just looking through some different things around role modelling, and I've come up with a new word. Well, I've not come up with a new word, but I found a new word that I wasn't actually familiar with, called multi-potentialite, which is looking at your potential from lots of different perspectives and developing role models according to those different perspectives in life. And so this is I'm going to quote now some of this multi-potentialite role modelling from somebody called Stephanie Gemmell. So she says that since we're unlikely to find role models that holistically overlap with all of our multi-potentialite interests and values, identifying multiple role models who align with certain parts of our long-term pursuits and goals can serve as a source of inspiration to build our own unique life trajectories. So she splits it into 5 sections. So the first section's your process and workflow role model. So this is supposed to be based around this role model should be someone whose artistic or professional approach, hang on, just flip page, to their work aligns with your own values and goals. So I was thinking about role models that could tick this box for me, and I came up with the 3 guys that I do this podcast with. So massive part of my professional development. I've said about Ian before being one of my previous lecturers, and obviously a huge role model for me at lots of stages throughout my development. But obviously doing this with you guys and seeing how you guys work, not only as podcasters but as lecturers who've been doing this a lot longer than me, I definitely look up to you guys and value your opinion on all things to do with my professional life. And then number 2, your self-advocacy role model. So this individual might be someone whose advocacy is a major part of their life, or they might be someone who conducts themselves in their daily interactions in a way that inspires you. So I kind of have been reading a little bit around Dr. Martin Luther King recently, because my daughter's looking at him, looking into Martin Luther King at school. That's who I'd probably choose as my role model for that. And then number 3, your impact role model. So this person's impact can stem from their creative or professional work, interprofessional relationships, mentorship of others, advocacy, or simply the attitude about life that they embody. I haven't actually got anybody for this yet. I'm still thinking on that one, but there's multiple people that I'm sure I can fit into that box. One person that sprung to mind with quite a few of this is somebody I'm constantly involved in writing papers with, called Molly Courtney, and she's like quite, I don't know if you guys have heard of Molly, but she has a lot of things published in the healthcare press, and you know, from working with her, she never gives up. So if she gets knocked back by a particular journal, she'll then, like a dog with a bone, go and send it to another journal. And we're at the point of, we've been working on this piece of work for about 12 months and we keep getting knocked back, and she just keeps going again. We've kept reading this blinking transcript of what we're going to submit, and she's such an inspiring person. You know, Molly is probably somebody I can put in that for that role model. And then your 2 more to go, lads, and I'm done. Your evolution and longevity role model. So this role model should inspire you to continue to develop and cultivate a renewed sense of identity through your lifetime. I just thought about Nelson Mandela, somebody who just never give up, you know, and continue to evolve as a person as he went through his life, and obviously was in prison for how many years? 28. Oh, I was going to say 28. I was 1 year out, and came out of prison and went on to be the president of his country, proving to everybody in the entire world that he was right for what he stood up for. And I think everybody should have Nelson Mandela as a role model, to be fair. And then finally, more pertinently, I suppose, the meaning role model. So meaning role model could include spiritual or religious leaders you respect, individuals who have directly mentored or advised you, writers or artists who have informed your outlook on life, or individuals in your life you consider to be wise. So I was just talking about my dad at the very start of my section, and the fact that he wasn't the greatest role model. And by the time I got to 16, 17, I started actually working as an apprentice. He was pretty much non-existent. He was in the pub all the time and didn't really have that much time for me. And I ended up being an apprentice of a chap called Fred Bennett. Fred took me under his wing, and he'd worked with my dad, actually, funnily enough. But he took me under his wing and he treated me like a human being, like somebody who was worth spending time with. We both had interests in music. He really enhanced my love of the Beatles and other musicians as well. And I've always remember Fred for inviting us round, me and my girlfriend, now wife, on a Friday evening for a Chinese, and then listening to some music, because he was probably that bloke that became a father figure and a role model for me, and kind of informed me in so many ways with my masculinity and whatnot. So, just to name drop Freddie, thank you for everything you did for me. And, yeah, that's me done. So thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Dan. I'm very gutted you haven't got Jurgen Klopp as one of your role models, but we'll work on that. We'll work on that. And we've also learned an awful lot about Conliffe today as well, haven't we, with his Littlewoods catalogues? But so amazing again, chaps, for your part here, and we've looked at different angles of masculinity, and hopefully people have found this useful. We're going to take a very short break, and then after the break we're going to be joined by Tom Van Den Hurk, and we're going to be talking all about A Little While Longer.
You're listening to the Men's Mental Health Podcast, The Man Hug.
Okay, so we're really thrilled here on The Man Hug to be joined by another fantastic guest. This time we're joined by a filmmaker, Tom Van Den Hurk, and Tom has recently created a short documentary that I'll get Tom to tell you all about it actually then. So Tom, welcome to The Man Hug.
Thank you very much, Dean. Thank you for having me on The Man Hug.
It's great. So I know quite a bit about the film, haven't seen it already, but for our listeners, can you just tell us a little bit of description about what they can expect with A Little While Longer?
Of course. A Little While Longer is a 30-minute long documentary film that we shot last year, and it follows 3 protagonists, 3 men, who all try to take their own lives at some point. Mm-hmm. We get them all to come together on the Isle of Aran in Scotland, and for 3 days the 3 guys live together and share their stories with each other.
Oh, brilliant! And how did this come about, Tom? What was the idea behind creating a film that focuses on male suicide survivors in particular?
There are a couple of stories really, and I've got a very personal story that I would like to share with your listeners. Mm-hmm. In 2005, when I was 16, just before I turned 17, I tried to take my own life. And that was something that deeply impacted me and stayed with me for a very, very long time, really. Mm-hmm. But it was something I just didn't feel comfortable talking about at all. I didn't have the confidence. And until very recently, I felt that I was being stigmatized whenever I tried to talk about it. Mm-hmm. I had some very negative experiences where in the past I wanted to make a film about some of my experiences, and I was basically shut down, and I was questioned whether I would be strong enough to make a film about these sort of events in my life, which I was really, really angry about, because I felt like somebody is stigmatizing me here. They don't know anything about me or my current state. They just judge me based on something that happened to me a long time ago. So I felt there was really a need to make a film about suicide and stigma and men, because I just encountered so much stigma in my own life. Yeah. And when my colleague Isa and me, who's the co-director of this film, when we started researching this film and we shared the story with other people, everybody had something to say about suicide, because so many people lost somebody to it. But the one thing that we always noticed was that nobody was willing to talk about their own experiences. And we thought there must be so many people out there who have attempted to take their lives. I've thought about it, but I think these people still feel so stigmatized that they don't want to come forward. So we felt even more that there has to be a film, that the film needs to be made about this, because stigma and suicide is such a big issue. Yeah.
That's one of the things that when I watched it that really resonated with me was how well the 3 men got on together. So they were all from quite varying backgrounds, aren't they, the 3 main guys in the film, but they all seem to gel really well, I think, because they shared that common theme of struggle and survival,
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody came from a very different background. There's one of our protagonists, his name is John, and he was a very high-ranking academic. He had a very, very good life. He has a wonderful house, and we're in the hills in Scotland, and everybody would have probably said he's got the perfect life, perfect family life. But in 2019, he lost his son Cameron to suicide, which was a complete upheaval in his life, and it had the effect that he also made an attempt on his own life after that. John is a little bit older. I think he is in his 50s or 60s. Then we have David, who is also from Scotland. He's from Glasgow, and he is a recovering alcoholic. He was sober for 4 years, actually, when he made an attempt on his life. And then we have Jabir, who's from London. And Jabir, again, comes from a very different background. Jabir struggled with his work situation, where he didn't feel appreciated. He was looking forward to get a promotion, and he felt he was always put down. Nobody believed in him, and he really questioned his own self-worth. And then in the background, there was also questions about his sexuality, and that in his community, homosexuality was something that wasn't accepted at all, and that then made him to make an attempt on his life a few years ago.
Yeah. And that's interesting, isn't it? Because there was all, as you say, different reasons that led to that moment of the men not wanting to be here anymore. And this month's Man Hug, we're focusing on the theme of masculinity, and I think it really resonates through the film about, you know, men not being able to actually wave a white flag when they need to and reach out for the help. And I think the men speak very openly and honestly about that as well.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
So one of the main things that we like to share on the Man Hug is you know, how people can educate themselves and how they can, you know, enhance their knowledge around suicide prevention. What types of things have you learnt yourselves through this process?
I think probably by far the most important thing that I have learned is to always listen to stories that somebody has to tell. If somebody has made an attempt in the past, listen to that person very carefully and see what they have to say, because very often you will be very surprised. Even as filmmakers who knew a lot about suicide, and me as a person who has made an attempt in my own life, I came into this film not realising I was still carrying stigmas inside me. And even our three protagonists, they all say the same. You know, some of them work for charities, and even they still carried stigmas inside of them. But then you listen to other people and they completely change your point of view.
Yeah, so myself and my colleagues from the Man Hug, we got to see A Little While Longer, and we were absolutely blown away by it. It's such a beautiful film, and I think it's got such a powerful message and something that we don't really see on the screen often enough. So tell us, how can our listeners go and watch it, Tom?
So A Little While Longer will be released on the 15th of March this year. If you just go on YouTube on the 15th of March, type in A Little While Longer, and you should find it there.
Fantastic. As easy as that then. So 15th of March, get on YouTube, give it a watch. If you are in a place, you know, where you can screen it, I would advise that you do that, and then you all get onto social media and share your experience. I say myself and colleagues who have watched it, we got an awful lot out of it, as did a lot of our student nurses as well. It's such a powerful thing, and I wish you all the best with it as well, Tom. I hope it does reach that, you know, that audience that it fully deserves as well. One of the things that you do at the end of the film as well, obviously you flash the number up of the Samaritans as well, and you know, is that something again that through this process you've found, you know, about services and signposting for men in particular?
Yes, absolutely. I have to say that at the beginning of the film I was quite ignorant to the help that was out there. I assumed that because people have told me that they have been on waiting lists for a very long time to see psychological, psychiatric help, that it would be very, very difficult to receive help. But that actually isn't the case at all. So you have numbers like the Samaritans, for example, or you can always contact your GP and make an appointment and speak to them.
Yeah, it's such a good point, isn't it? And I think, you know, it's a common theme on the Man Hug. We often hear of a lot of people, as you say, may have long waiting lists, but there's some amazing services out there who will see you straight away, often charities and organisations, and they're so useful. And I think, you know, we're big advocates of the Hub of Hope on the Man Hug, and we're always saying if you need help, just access what's on your doorstep. Brilliant. And once again, Tom, I want to thank you. It's such a beautiful film, and the three guys in it are just all wonderful as well. So brave in telling their story, and also making it just so real and true, you know.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Tom. What we'll do is we'll put a link up as well on all of our social media, and we'll promote the film that way as well. But once again, from everyone here, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.
Okay.
Much appreciated.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
If you or anybody else you know is struggling with their mental health, visit hubofhope.co.uk or download the app today and find local and national mental health support.
Please make sure that you follow us on Twitter. It's @TheManHug. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next month.